It started with a whisper, a single name, carried through the marble hallways of Hollywood executives, whispered into the ears of powerful women who controlled studios, streaming empires, and careers, Meghan Markle. But this was not the Meghan Markle that the tabloids or red carpets portrayed. This was the Meghan Markle who walked into Amazon MGM studios with a vision that would rattle the very foundations of one of the most influential film companies in the world. Imagine walking into a boardroom where every chair is occupied by seasoned executives who have spent decades shaping Hollywood, and then asking for something so bold, so audacious, that it risks everything you've built your public persona on. That was Meghan. That was the moment that set the stage for a confrontation no one saw coming. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You may be asking yourself, why would a studio executive even consider blacklisting someone as famous as Meghan Markle? Isn't fame supposed to open doors? Doesn't being a former royal automatically grant influence, credibility, and the power to make things happen in Hollywood? That's exactly what Meghan believed. She came armed with vision, ambition, and what she assumed was a global passport to influence. But Hollywood is not a kingdom. It has no crown, no heir apparent, and no room for entitlement without results. This was about to become Meghan's harshest lesson yet. Jennifer Salk, the powerhouse at the helm of Amazon MGM Studios, had a reputation that preceded her. Known for her sharp instincts, her unwavering commitment to the studio's interests, and her ability to say no when others dared not, Salk was both revered and feared in equal measure. She had survived decades in an industry where careers were made or broken by a single executive memo, a passing comment in a meeting, or a glance across a table. Salk understood power. She understood Hollywood. And most importantly, she understood boundaries. But Meghan Markle, as we would soon see, had a very different understanding. In her mind, ambition was enough. Fame was enough. Royalty was enough. She wanted to produce her own films, carve out her own creative empire, and do it inside one of the most tightly controlled, profit-driven, and competitive studios in the world, and she wanted it on her terms. She wanted space, resources, and freedom that even seasoned filmmakers rarely received. And she wanted it for free. Can you even imagine asking for free resources at a company where every square foot of office space, every production slot, every dollar allocated is fought over by dozens of creatives, agents, and executives? Hollywood is ruthless, and in this world, there's a clear hierarchy. There are people who earn influence through years of negotiation, successful projects, and strategic alliances. And then there are outsiders. And Meghan Markle, despite her fame, was about to find herself in the second category. The story isn't just about ambition clashing with experience. It's about power, privilege, and perception. It's about what happens when a global celebrity enters an ecosystem built on competition, caution, and calculated risk. And it's about what happens when one of the most influential women in Hollywood decides to put her foot down, hard. To understand the gravity of this moment, consider what it means to be blacklisted in Hollywood. Blacklisting is not just a decision. It's a ripple, a whisper, a message sent through corridors, emails, and private calls that can follow a person for years. It's a subtle kind of punishment. You're not banned outright, but doors close, opportunities evaporate, and alliances begin to fray. Careers are derailed, reputations tarnished. And for Meghan, the potential consequences were enormous. Not only for her career, but for her public persona, her credibility, and the carefully curated image she had spent years constructing. So why did Meghan do it? Why would she risk alienating one of Hollywood's most formidable power brokers with a request so audacious it seemed almost naive? The answer lies in ambition, ego, and the belief that her status as a former royal and global celebrity would translate into unquestioned influence. But status doesn't guarantee respect in an environment where experience, results, and politics outweigh fame. And Meghan, as we would soon see, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. But let's rewind for a moment. This story isn't just about Meghan versus Amazon MGM. It's about Hollywood itself, the intricate web of relationships, the politics behind the scenes, and the unspoken rules that govern an industry built on visibility, risk, and leverage. Every studio has a hierarchy, every executive has a network, and every decision has ramifications. When a new player steps in, especially one with the global recognition of Meghan Markle, the reactions are never simple. There's fascination, curiosity, and sometimes envy. And then there's resistance. Jennifer Sock did not make her decision lightly. There were meetings, memos, and countless consultations behind closed doors. Legal teams weighed in. Production chiefs whispered possibilities. And still, the final call was hers. The decision would send shockwaves through Hollywood insiders, from A-list actors to emerging filmmakers, and everyone in between. Some saw it as a necessary assertion of authority. Others viewed it as a ruthless act that could ignite controversy on a global scale. And what was Meghan doing during all this? She wasn't silent. Reports indicate that she was actively campaigning, lobbying behind the scenes, and leveraging every connection she had. She believed in her vision so strongly that rejection wasn't an option. She was playing a high-stakes game, one that required diplomacy, strategy, and timing. But the rules she assumed applied didn't necessarily exist in this world. And the moment Sock said no, allegedly blacklisting her, the game changed. The stakes are more than professional. They are personal. Meghan's public persona has always been meticulously crafted. Every appearance, every statement, every project is calculated to reinforce an image of influence, intelligence, and cultural relevance. Being blacklisted threatens not just her ambitions, but the narrative she's spent years shaping. It's a clash of identity versus reality, expectation versus consequence. So, why is this story surfacing now? Timing is everything. In a post-Netflix era, with Meghan seeking new platforms to expand her creative empire, Hollywood insiders say tensions escalated to the breaking point. Rumors of the blacklist began circulating quietly, then leaked into the media, sparking debates, gossip, and heated speculation. Everyone wants to know, what was asked, why was it denied, and how does this affect the future of one of the most scrutinized women in the world? And now, the question everyone is asking. Can Meghan recover from this? Can she navigate the labyrinth of Hollywood politics, rebuild bridges, or will this blacklist define the next chapter of her career? It's a question that hangs in the air, charged with tension, and the answer is anything but predictable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. When Meghan Markle first stepped onto the Hollywood scene, she did so with a mix of confidence and curiosity, the kind of energy that only someone who has been trained to live under constant scrutiny can carry. She had already mastered the art of the public gaze, learning how to command attention with a glance, a smile, a carefully phrased sentence. But Hollywood was a different beast. This wasn't the royal family, where protocol and titles could shield her from missteps. Here, merit, influence, and political savvy were everything. And in that world, Meghan had to prove herself all over again. You might think her fame would automatically open doors. After all, she had millions of followers, a global presence, and an instantly recognizable name. But in Hollywood, notoriety is not always synonymous with respect. Executives are trained to look beyond the public persona, to evaluate capability, reliability, and the potential for sustainable influence. To them, Meghan was an intriguing figure, yes, but she was also an unknown variable, someone who had just arrived from a world of privilege, protected from the usual grind, and now asking to play in the deep end. Her ambitions were clear from the start. Meghan wasn't just content with acting or occasional appearances. She wanted to produce. She wanted to create content on her terms. She envisioned her own creative empire, a studio within a studio, where she could champion stories she felt passionate about and shape narratives according to her vision. This wasn't mere vanity. For Meghan, producing her own films was a declaration of independence, a way to define herself outside of royalty and outside the preconceptions that Hollywood might have of her as a celebrity. But ambition can be a double-edged sword. It fuels drive and determination, but it also invites scrutiny, skepticism, and resistance. And in Meghan's case, it was about to collide head-on with the realities of a highly competitive environment, led by executives like Jennifer Sock, who had spent decades perfecting the balance of vision, risk management, and political navigation in Hollywood. To truly understand Meghan's challenge, one must consider her previous experiences in entertainment. She was no stranger to the spotlight. Suits, her breakout show, had placed her in the homes of millions. She understood cameras, scripts, and production schedules. She had met directors, producers, and agents, and had learned the etiquette of the industry, at least on the surface. But producing wasn't just about understanding television. It was about power, negotiation, and influence. It was about convincing established gatekeepers to trust a new player with resources they had spent years building. And Meghan, despite her fame, was still a new player. Some insiders say Meghan underestimated the subtle politics at play. In royal life, a request often carried weight simply because it was made by someone of high status. In Hollywood, requests are measured against metrics: projected revenue, risk assessments, creative control, and the potential for reputation damage. Meghan's approach, which leaned heavily on her status and visibility, may have come across as audacious or even naive to those entrenched in the studio system. Yet, it wasn't arrogance. It was belief. She believed in her vision so strongly that she assumed others would see it with the same clarity, the same inevitability. She imagined a world where her ideas would not just be heard, but championed, where doors would swing open and resources would flow without resistance. But Hollywood, as we were about to see, had a very different set of rules. The whispers started quietly at first. Executive assistants noticed unusual emails. Production coordinators mentioned unusual requests. Word spread that Meghan Markle was asking for space within Amazon MGM studios. Not just any space, but prime office real estate, creative freedom, and logistical support that would normally be reserved for established producers with proven track records. In Hollywood terms, this was the equivalent of walking into the penthouse of a skyscraper and asking for the keys to the boardroom. It was bold. It was unprecedented. And for some, it was a warning sign. Jennifer Salk, known for her discerning eye and decisive leadership, received these requests with measured skepticism. She had seen ambitious newcomers before, actors, directors, and producers, who came with high expectations and little understanding of the operational realities of running a studio. Salk was not easily impressed. She valued results, experience, and collaboration above celebrity, and Meghan's approach, while innovative in theory, presented logistical and strategic challenges that could not be ignored. But Meghan did not back down. She had allies, some in creative departments, some in media relations, who were intrigued by her vision and willing to support her cause. She believed that if she could navigate the initial resistance, she could carve out a space for herself within the studio, one where her voice would be heard and her ideas realized. She was prepared to push boundaries, challenge norms, and even risk alienating powerful figures if it meant achieving her goals. As her ambitions became more evident, the tension in the corridors of Amazon MGM began to mount. Executives debated privately, weighing the potential benefits against the risks. Some saw the opportunity to harness Meghan's visibility for the studio's gain. Others feared the reputational risk, the unpredictability, and the precedent it might set for future requests from high-profile outsiders. Meghan's fame was a double-edged sword. It drew attention and interest, but it also brought scrutiny, expectations, and a level of pressure that few newcomers would face. Meanwhile, Meghan's team worked tirelessly, strategizing, lobbying, and attempting to navigate the delicate dynamics of Hollywood politics. Emails flew, phone calls were made, and private meetings were scheduled. But no matter how meticulous the planning, there remained an undercurrent of uncertainty. How would Salk respond? Would she embrace Meghan's vision, or would she see it as overreach, a challenge to the established order? The tension was palpable, and everyone in the studio was aware that a decision, one that could have lasting implications, was imminent. This chapter of Meghan's journey is essential to understanding what came next. Her ambitions were not just about producing films. They were about asserting autonomy, claiming agency, and redefining her place in an industry that had never operated on the rules of royalty. She wanted creative control, resources, and influence, but she was also entering a world where such requests were scrutinized, debated, and often denied. And yet, despite the warnings, the whispers, and the subtle resistance, Meghan continued to press forward. She believed that persistence, visibility, and strategic maneuvering could tip the scales in her favor. She assumed that her track record, her celebrity, and her unique perspective would persuade even the most cautious executives to grant her requests. But ambition alone is not enough in Hollywood. It never has been. The tension built to a moment that would change everything. Meghan, emboldened by her belief in her vision, made her boldest move yet. She formally requested dedicated space within Amazon MGM to produce her own films. A request that would not just test her resolve, but the patience, judgment, and authority of one of the most influential executives in Hollywood. The decision that followed would send shockwaves through the industry, alter perceptions of Meghan Markle's influence, and set the stage for a story that no one, not even her closest allies, could have anticipated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Inside the glass and steel towers of Amazon MGM Studios, the atmosphere was tense, even by Hollywood standards. Executives moved with measured steps, phones buzzed incessantly, and the hum of whispered conversations carried through the hallways. But one meeting that afternoon had the potential to shake the very foundations of the studio, and it wasn't about a blockbuster script or a high-stakes merger. It was about Meghan Markle. Imagine walking into a room where every chair is occupied by seasoned executives who have spent decades mastering Hollywood's delicate dance between creativity and commerce. Every person in that room knew the stakes, understood the politics, and wielded influence over billions of dollars in film and television projects. And then, at the head of the table, Meghan Markle appears, confident, poised, and ready to ask for something audacious: free space to produce her own films. The request alone was enough to make even veteran executives pause. Free space? In one of the most coveted studios in the world? For someone whose production track record was minimal at best? The audacity of it was staggering. But Meghan wasn't just asking. She was presenting her vision with the same conviction that had carried her from Suits to royal life and back into the public eye. She spoke of creative freedom, innovative projects, and the potential for Amazon MGM to tap into stories that only she could champion. Jennifer Salk, seated near the head of the table, leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. To her, Meghan's fame was undeniable, but fame alone doesn't produce results. Salk had seen countless celebrities arrive with bold visions and big promises, only to fizzle under the pressure of Hollywood's unforgiving environment. She knew how to separate substance from spectacle, and Meghan's proposal, as compelling as it sounded, required scrutiny. The room was silent for a moment, everyone absorbing Meghan's request, evaluating the implications, weighing risks. The tension was palpable, as if the very air had thickened. Would Salk approve the request, allowing Meghan unprecedented access and resources? Or would she stand firm, asserting the boundaries that had kept Amazon MGM a powerhouse in the industry for decades? Meghan, sensing hesitation, pressed further. She spoke with passion, highlighting her unique perspective, her global reach, and the audience she could attract. She referenced past successes, not just her acting career, but her influence as a cultural figure and her work on social causes. Every point was strategic, every sentence measured. But while her pitch was compelling, the executives weren't easily swayed. They had seen ambition before. They had seen charm. And they had seen potential. But they had also seen disappointment. Salk's response was measured but firm. "We value your ideas and your enthusiasm," she said, her tone professional, almost disarming in its calmness. "But we operate on results, accountability, and proven track records. Requests for dedicated space and resources are reserved for those who have demonstrated consistent success within our system." Her words were polite, but they carried weight. They were a reminder that, in Hollywood, there is a line between ambition and entitlement, and Meghan had just approached it, boldly, without caution. Some insiders say the room held its collective breath at that moment. Others report subtle shifts, raised eyebrows, quick glances exchanged across the table, whispered reassurances between senior executives. Meghan, however, remained composed, masking any hint of frustration. She understood the stakes. She knew that appearing vulnerable or desperate could undermine her position. So she continued, elaborating on her vision, detailing potential projects, and emphasizing the mutual benefits of collaboration. But what the executives hadn't anticipated was Meghan's insistence on controlling the narrative. She wasn't just asking for space. She was asking for autonomy, a level of influence that could challenge the studio's established protocols. She wanted creative freedom, decision-making authority, and the ability to champion projects without interference. It wasn't just a pitch, it was a power move. And in an environment where control is closely guarded, it was bound to provoke resistance. Sock, ever the strategist, knew that giving in would set a precedent. It would signal to other high-profile outsiders that rules could be bent, that fame could override experience. The ripple effects could be significant: operational challenges, morale issues, and even financial risk. She had to balance respect for Meghan's ambition with the responsibility to maintain the studio's integrity. As the meeting progressed, subtle tensions emerged. Meghan's team, supportive but cautious, interjected occasionally, emphasizing the potential benefits and attempting to frame the request as mutually advantageous. But the underlying conflict was clear: Meghan's desire for influence versus the studio's commitment to structure and accountability. The air was charged with anticipation, and every word, every gesture, every nod carried significance. Insiders later revealed that the turning point came when Meghan outlined her vision for multiple concurrent projects, films and series she intended to produce independently within Amazon MGM. The scope was ambitious, the scale unprecedented. It was not simply a request for space. It was a request to reshape part of the studio's operational framework to accommodate her personal ambitions. For Sock, the decision was no longer about politeness or negotiation. It was about principle. What followed was a moment that would soon ripple through Hollywood. Sock, after careful deliberation, delivered a response that shocked not just Meghan but the entire room. She declined the request, and not in the soft, diplomatic way executives often phrase rejections. According to sources, it was a firm, unmistakable no. The decision carried the weight of authority, signaling that Meghan's fame and ambition, while notable, did not automatically grant her privilege within the walls of Amazon MGM. The room, though professional, felt the tension of the moment. Meghan's expression, carefully composed throughout, betrayed the slightest flicker of surprise. Her team exchanged hurried glances, attempting to recalibrate, to strategize, to find a path forward. But the message was clear. Boundaries had been set, and the rules of Hollywood would not bend for celebrity alone. As Meghan left the boardroom that day, the whispers began to circulate. Executives, producers, and even assistants began discussing the implications. Was Meghan's ambition a sign of visionary thinking, or had she overstepped, risking credibility in a highly competitive industry? And more importantly, what would her next move be? Would she accept the decision, recalibrate her approach, or push back in ways that could escalate tensions further? This meeting, as insiders describe, was only the beginning. It marked the moment where ambition collided with authority, where vision met reality, and where a global celebrity realized that Hollywood does not operate on fame alone. It was a turning point, one that would set in motion a series of events, leaks, and confrontations that no one could have predicted. And what came next? Meghan's next move would not be subtle. It would test alliances, challenge authority, and ignite a controversy that would ripple far beyond the walls of Amazon MGM. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. That it's one thing to say no. It's another to say no in a room where every eye is on you, where the decision carries weight far beyond the walls of the boardroom. Jennifer Sock had just delivered the most shocking message Meghan Markle had yet received in Hollywood: a refusal to grant her the coveted space and autonomy to produce her own films. But why did Sock make that decision? What motivated one of the most powerful women in the industry to seemingly go against a global celebrity? The answer lies at the intersection of experience, strategy, and the unforgiving rules of Hollywood. From the moment Meghan stepped into Amazon MGM, Sock recognized ambition, but ambition alone does not guarantee results. In her decades at the helm, Sock had seen stars rise and fall in record time. She had observed talented individuals whose fame suggested inevitability, only to witness their efforts crumble under the weight of expectations, mismanagement, or lack of follow-through. Sock's philosophy was simple: fame is fleeting, results are enduring. To her, Meghan's request was bold, yes. But it was untested. There were no proven metrics, no guarantee that allocating dedicated space, resources, and influence to someone with a limited production track record would pay off. The stakes were enormous. Amazon MGM is not just another studio. It is a global powerhouse with billions of dollars riding on its projects. Every decision, every allocation, every green light carries implications for revenue, reputation, and competitive positioning. SOC understood that even a single misstep could ripple across the industry, affecting investor confidence, talent relationships, and the studio's market positioning. Approving Meghan's request was not a simple yes or no. It was a strategic gamble with high stakes. Moreover, there were operational considerations. Allocating prime studio space and production resources to Meghan meant displacing others. Established producers, filmmakers, and teams who had built their projects within the studio system. These were individuals who had earned their influence through years of consistent work, successful projects, and strategic alliances. To give one newcomer, regardless of fame, an advantage over seasoned insiders would not only disrupt workflow, but could create resentment, tension, and friction within the studio. SOC knew the cost of morale and internal stability, and she factored it heavily into her decision. SOC also had to consider precedent. Hollywood is an ecosystem of influence, and precedent matters. If a high-profile outsider could walk in and demand space and authority, what message would that send to the next celebrity, the next ambitious newcomer, or even the studio's own teams? It was not about Meghan personally. It was about maintaining the integrity of the system. Boundaries had to be established, or chaos could follow. And yet, there was more to the decision than strategy. Sources close to SOC suggest that she viewed Meghan's request as a test of character, of professionalism, persistence, and adaptability. In Hollywood, the ability to navigate rejection, pivot, and collaborate is often more valuable than raw ambition. SOC had to consider whether Meghan could work within the established framework, respect the rules of the studio, and build credibility over time. Her refusal was not just a denial, it was a statement. Influence must be earned, not assumed. Another key factor was risk management. Meghan's public profile was a double-edged sword. Her fame could draw attention, but it also attracted intense scrutiny. Every decision she made, every project she touched, would be dissected by the media, fans, and critics. For a studio like Amazon MGM, associating with projects perceived as vanity endeavors or high-risk experiments could have financial and reputational consequences. SOC had to weigh the potential upside against the risks, and the risks were significant. There were also political dimensions to consider. Hollywood is not just a creative industry. It is a network of influence, relationships, and power. Executives like SOC must navigate a web of alliances, obligations, and expectations. Approving Meghan's request could have unintended political ramifications, upsetting established partnerships or creating friction with influential talent and producers who had long-standing relationships with the studio. It was a delicate balance, and SOC was acutely aware of the broader implications. Some insiders claim that Meghan's approach may have inadvertently signaled entitlement rather than collaboration. In an industry where subtlety, negotiation, and diplomacy are critical, a direct request for autonomy and resources can be perceived as audacious or even presumptuous. Meghan's confidence, while admirable, may have been interpreted as overreach, especially when juxtaposed with the carefully measured tactics SOC was accustomed to managing. Hollywood rewards assertiveness, but it also punishes those who bypass established protocols. And then there was timing. SOC had to consider the broader context, the studio's ongoing projects, the competitive landscape, and the recent fallout from high-profile industry deals. Netflix's cancellation of Meghan's previous deals had already raised questions in some circles. SOC had to determine whether granting her request could mitigate those risks or compound them. The timing was critical, and the decision required a delicate balance between opportunity and caution. It's also worth noting SOC's personality and leadership style. She is known for decisiveness, strategic thinking, and an ability to prioritize long-term outcomes over short-term optics. To approve Meghan's request without clear evidence of capability would be out of character. SOC's approach is rooted in results, evidence, and proven track records. Fame may open doors, but it does not substitute for experience, performance, and credibility. In this sense, her refusal was consistent with her principles and leadership philosophy. Furthermore, SOC had to consider the optics for the studio. Amazon MGM is a brand that has cultivated credibility, consistency, and trust in the entertainment industry. Associating with high-profile individuals carries both opportunity and risk. A decision perceived as favoritism could undermine internal trust and external reputation. SOC's refusal was, in many ways, a protective measure to maintain the studio's credibility and ensure that merit, not celebrity, remained the guiding principle. But what made this decision particularly notable was its public resonance. News of the refusal leaked, and Hollywood insiders began speculating on the reasons behind it. Was it a personal clash? A judgment on Meghan's abilities? Or a principled stance rooted in strategy and risk management? The ambiguity fueled speculation, gossip, and intrigue, making the story far larger than the decision itself. In the end, SOC's no was a masterclass in leadership, strategy, and Hollywood politics. It wasn't personal, though some interpreted it that way. It wasn't about rejecting Meghan's vision outright, though it would feel like a roadblock. It was about maintaining the structure, accountability, and credibility that define one of the most powerful studios in the world. Yet, as Meghan left the meeting, there was a lingering tension, a sense of unfinished business. Ambition like hers doesn't disappear quietly. It recalibrates, adapts, and seeks new avenues. The refusal may have closed one door, but insiders whispered that it had opened another. A confrontation, a maneuver, a move that would challenge not only SOC's authority but the studio's equilibrium. And what came next would ignite a firestorm, forcing Meghan to navigate a Hollywood landscape more ruthless, political, and scrutinized than she had ever imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The whispers began quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the private corridors of Amazon MGM studios. At first, it was a murmur among assistants, coordinators, and junior executives. Did you hear what happened with Meghan Markle? Then it spread, a low hum through production floors, email chains, and Slack messages. By the end of the week, the story had evolved into something far larger. According to multiple insiders, Meghan Markle had been quietly blacklisted. The term itself, blacklisted, sent chills through Hollywood veterans. It's not a word used lightly. It carries weight, implication, and consequence. To be blacklisted means opportunities dry up, doors close silently, and influence erodes without a single public announcement. So how did it happen? And why would Amazon MGM, a studio known for embracing high-profile talent, take such a drastic step against one of the world's most famous women? The answer lies in a combination of audacity, perception, and the unforgiving rules of the studio system. Sources reveal that the blacklist began internally, months before it reached public ears. Meghan's request for dedicated space and autonomous production authority had already raised red flags. Emails circulated between senior executives questioning the viability of granting such privileges to someone with limited production experience. Private meetings dissected the potential risks: operational disruption, morale issues, financial exposure, and reputational hazard. Every possible angle was considered, every precedent reviewed, and the consensus began to form. Amazon MGM could not, and would not, bend its rules for Meghan. But it didn't stop at refusal. According to leaked insider reports, SOC and her team implemented subtle measures to limit Meghan's influence without attracting public scrutiny. Certain projects she had pitched were quietly deprioritized. Production teams were instructed to limit her access to strategic meetings. Requests for additional resources, previously met with cautious consideration, were systematically delayed or denied. It was a classic form of blacklisting, not an outright ban, but a series of professional obstacles designed to curtail her ambitions and assert control over the studio's operational framework. Some insiders described the atmosphere as tense and almost surreal. For a woman who had navigated the pressures of the royal family and the global spotlight, Meghan faced a kind of resistance she had never encountered before, one that was bureaucratic, systemic, and almost invisible. She was not being blocked in the traditional sense. Instead, the studio was subtly signaling that her presence and demands were disruptive. It was a silent warning. Influence must be earned, not assumed. Leaked emails provide further insight. One senior executive allegedly wrote, "While Meghan brings visibility, we cannot compromise our operational structure or give precedence to unproven projects. Fame is not a substitute for execution." Another internal memo reportedly stated, "All production requests should be evaluated strictly on past results, not perceived influence. Ensure that no exceptions are made for external celebrities." These documents, according to insiders, formed the backbone of what became known internally as the Meghan Markle Protocol, a set of unspoken rules effectively limiting her access to critical studio resources. The blacklist extended beyond production resources. Several sources indicated that key industry contacts, agents, directors, and potential collaborators were subtly advised against prioritizing Meghan's projects. Calls went unanswered, meetings were rescheduled repeatedly, and access to critical networking opportunities was restricted. In Hollywood terms, this was a quiet but devastating blow. Opportunity is currency, and Meghan found herself suddenly on the outside, navigating a system that, for all her fame, was proving harder to penetrate than she anticipated. What made the situation even more dramatic was the contrast between Meghan's expectations and reality. She had approached the studio with a vision and a sense of inevitability, believing her celebrity and global profile would translate seamlessly into influence. Instead, she encountered what insiders describe as a wall of resistance, an environment where results, reputation, and adherence to process outweighed fame. Her ambitions collided with institutional caution, creating a tension that would ripple far beyond Amazon MGM's walls. But the story took a darker turn when details of the blacklist began leaking to the press. Anonymous sources, likely frustrated by internal politics, shared snippets with entertainment journalists. The story quickly gained traction. Meghan Markle reportedly blacklisted by Amazon MGM, read one headline. Another article suggested that her projects were being quietly shelved and that her influence within the studio had been curtailed. Within days, social media erupted. Fans expressed outrage, critics debated the decision, and the controversy became a trending topic across platforms. Insiders describe a mix of emotions within the studio. Some executives were relieved that the rules had been enforced, viewing the blacklist as necessary to maintain operational integrity. Others reportedly felt uneasy about the optics, recognizing that the move could ignite public backlash and damage relationships with talent outside the studio. Hollywood is, after all, a world where perception matters as much as reality, and the decision to limit Meghan's influence carried both practical and symbolic weight. The leaks also revealed a hidden layer of strategy. Sources indicate that Salk and her team were not merely reacting, they were controlling the narrative. By carefully managing communications, selectively approving minor projects, and maintaining a professional facade, the studio ensured that Meghan's ambitions were curtailed without causing an immediate public scandal. It was a calculated form of power management. Assert control internally, minimize damage externally, and maintain authority in a world where every move is scrutinized. But for Meghan, the impact was profound. The subtle blacklisting affected her ability to mobilize teams, secure talent, and implement her creative vision. Meetings that had once been opportunities to pitch ideas now became exercises in diplomacy and negotiation. Each request, each interaction, had to be weighed carefully against the reality of the studio's limitations. What she had assumed would be a platform for empowerment became a maze of restrictions and roadblocks. Yet, Meghan did not retreat quietly. Sources suggest that she attempted to navigate the blacklist strategically, identifying allies within the studio, lobbying behind the scenes, and exploring alternative avenues for influence. She remained determined to assert her creative vision, even in the face of resistance from the most powerful executive in Hollywood. Her efforts, however, were met with a mix of sympathy, skepticism, and quiet opposition. Allies whispered encouragement, but the system itself remained firm, reminding her at every turn that authority in Hollywood cannot be demanded, it must be earned. The leaked insider reports painted a picture of a delicate battle, one of ambition versus authority, vision versus protocol, and celebrity versus institutional power. They revealed the intricacies of studio politics, the subtle ways in which influence is granted or denied, and the high stakes involved when a global figure like Meghan Markle enters an ecosystem designed to test, challenge, and ultimately control the ambitions of outsiders. And yet, these leaks also fueled speculation, curiosity, and public fascination. The world began to watch closely. How would Meghan respond? Would she push back against the studio, escalate the conflict, or pivot to alternative strategies? The suspense built, amplified by social media, gossip columns, and entertainment news. What had started as an internal matter became a public drama, captivating audiences worldwide. But what came next would push the conflict to new heights, revealing private negotiations, strategic maneuvers, and behind-the-scenes drama that no one expected. Meghan Markle's story at Amazon MGM was far from over. And the next chapter would change everything. The first thing Meghan did after hearing of the subtle blacklist was assess her position. Her team, small but determined, mapped out her next moves. How could she regain momentum in an industry that had just signaled, quietly but decisively, that she wasn't welcome on the terms she demanded? The answer, they decided, was charm, influence, and relentless networking. If doors were closed one way, she would find another entrance. One that allowed her to assert control without directly confronting SOC or the studio hierarchy. Meghan's strategy was multifaceted. First, she began meeting with directors, producers, and talent agents, attempting to leverage her public profile as a bridge rather than a weapon. She highlighted her unique perspective, her global reach, and her understanding of storytelling that resonated with diverse audiences. She pitched herself as a collaborator, emphasizing how her involvement could elevate projects, attract international attention, and generate financial gain. On paper, it was a persuasive argument. In practice, it was complicated. Hollywood insiders, while intrigued, were wary. Fame alone, after all, does not equate to reliability or expertise in film production. She also attempted to charm the media, carefully curating appearances, interviews, and public statements. Each interaction was designed to reinforce her credibility as a producer, not just a celebrity. She spoke about projects she hoped to develop, social issues she wanted to explore, and narratives that could bring untold stories to a global audience. Her public persona became a tool in her strategic maneuvering. The charm offensive was as much about perception as it was about networking. Yet, the Hollywood elite are not easily swayed. Many executives and producers viewed Meghan's charm offensive with skepticism, interpreting it as an attempt to bypass institutional barriers rather than a genuine offer of collaboration. Emails circulated internally, noting that while her ideas were intriguing, the lack of track record posed a tangible risk. Some industry insiders questioned whether her ambitions could translate into actionable projects or if they would ultimately fizzle under pressure. This skepticism only intensified Meghan's efforts. She doubled down on her networking, attending high-profile industry events, private screenings, and after-parties, all with the aim of building alliances. She spoke with writers, offering insight into character development and storytelling. She engaged with cinematographers, producers, and studio executives, presenting herself as knowledgeable, invested, and committed. Her goal was clear. She needed allies, advocates, and champions who could counterbalance the subtle resistance she faced from Amazon MGM's leadership. Some of her tactics worked. A few junior producers and independent filmmakers were captivated by her vision, offering tentative support for projects she outlined. Social media influencers, journalists, and even celebrity peers amplified her presence, framing her ambitions as bold, innovative, and forward-thinking. Public perception, at least momentarily, seemed to favor Meghan. She was no longer just a former royal. She was a producer with vision, intent, and the willingness to challenge the status quo. But the challenges persisted. SOC's decision, while subtle, had created tangible obstacles. Key resources, personnel, and logistical support remained restricted. Major studios were hesitant to commit to collaborations without SOC's tacit approval, and rumors of her blacklisting made some industry figures wary of associating with her. It was a delicate dance: advance too boldly and risk backlash, advance too cautiously and risk stagnation. Meghan responded with calculated audacity. She began reaching out to contacts outside Amazon MGM, exploring alternative studios, independent production companies, and even international co-productions. She pitched ideas for films and series that aligned with her vision, sometimes bypassing traditional channels entirely. She was attempting to create leverage, a scenario in which her projects would have sufficient momentum that even SOC and Amazon MGM might reconsider their stance. Insiders reported moments of tension during this phase. Some executives felt Meghan's approach bordered on overreach, while others admired her persistence. The duality of admiration and wariness became a defining feature of her Hollywood persona. She was both respected for her tenacity and questioned for her audacity. Every meeting, every email, every strategic decision carried consequences, not just for her projects, but for her credibility and future in the industry. At the same time, Meghan's public charm offensive played a crucial role in shaping perception. Carefully timed interviews highlighted her creativity, empathy, and understanding of storytelling. Social media campaigns subtly promoted her vision, framing her as an innovator and cultural influencer rather than a celebrity seeking privileges. The narrative was shifting, at least in public discourse, but inside the studio, the blacklist remained an unspoken barrier. Meghan's team also explored strategic partnerships, identifying influential figures who could lend credibility and access to resources. She reached out to veteran directors, independent producers, and even philanthropic organizations with interests in media and storytelling. Each connection was calculated, designed to reinforce her presence, build alliances, and create the appearance of inevitability, that her projects were not only viable, but desirable. Yet, for all her efforts, the challenge remained. Amazon MGM's internal resistance was not easily overcome. The studio's leadership, aware of her charm offensive and strategic maneuvers, tightened their internal protocols. Emails were carefully monitored, meetings were scrutinized, and subtle restrictions persisted. Meghan's influence within the studio remained limited, forcing her to innovate further, adapt quickly, and navigate a maze of resistance that tested her resilience, patience, and strategic thinking. Despite these obstacles, Meghan did not retreat. She maintained a visible presence in Hollywood circles, cultivating relationships, attending events, and positioning herself as a collaborator rather than a disruptor. She emphasized her commitment to projects with social impact, narratives that highlighted underrepresented voices, and stories that could appeal to global audiences. Her approach combined ambition, charm, and strategic acumen, an effort to convert public visibility into tangible influence within an industry that rarely grants such influence without proof of capability. Yet the underlying tension persisted. Hollywood insiders continued to debate the implications of her presence, the legitimacy of her projects, and the potential for long-term disruption. Rumors circulated about internal divisions, covert alliances, and the subtle measures implemented to limit her influence. Meghan, for her part, had to balance persistence with discretion, assertiveness with diplomacy, and visibility with strategy. Every move was scrutinized, every interaction analyzed, and every decision carried the potential to shift the balance of power. The stage was set for further escalation. Meghan's charm offensive, while ambitious and well-executed, had not yet produced the breakthrough she needed. Amazon MGM remained a gatekeeper, and SOC's influence continued to shape the narrative. The battle was no longer just about access or resources. It had become a struggle for credibility, autonomy, and control over her creative destiny. And then came a whisper that would change everything. An insider hinted that a crucial executive within another major studio was about to take an unprecedented interest in Meghan's ambitions. This development had the potential to disrupt the carefully managed tension, introduce new alliances, and escalate the stakes far beyond anything anyone had anticipated. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The moment the news of Meghan Markle's subtle blacklisting at Amazon MGM leaked, Hollywood's reaction was instantaneous and electric. In a town built on gossip, connections, and influence, the story spread like wildfire. Some insiders whispered behind closed doors, others debated openly in industry mixers, and social media lit up with speculation and analysis. But what truly made this moment unprecedented wasn't just Meghan's celebrity. It was the mix of admiration, envy, skepticism, and outright hostility that followed her every move. Imagine the scene. In the private lounges of executives, in the penthouses of agents, in the corner offices of producers, everyone had an opinion. Did she really think she could walk in and rewrite the rules? One executive reportedly asked. She's talented, but ambition without experience can be dangerous, said another. And yet, there were those who admired her audacity, seeing a woman willing to fight for creative control in an industry dominated by men and entrenched power structures. The reactions were as polarized as they were intense. Hollywood is an ecosystem of friends, foes, and frenemies, a network where alliances are fluid, loyalty is often transactional, and gossip is currency. Meghan's blacklisting instantly became a litmus test. Those aligned with her ambition praised her courage. Those skeptical of her influence celebrated what they saw as a necessary check on celebrity overreach. Every comment, every whispered rumor, every public reaction carried stakes. And for Meghan, navigating this landscape was as challenging as producing a blockbuster under a tight deadline. One of the first reactions came from her peers in the acting world. Some offered cautious support, expressing sympathy for her ambition and frustration at the perceived unfairness of the situation. Others, however, were less forgiving, questioning whether her high-profile approach was appropriate or effective. The delicate dance of public support versus private skepticism began to shape Meghan's narrative. Every handshake, every dinner, every conversation became a potential story, and every story could either strengthen or weaken her position in Hollywood. Agents and managers quickly assessed the situation. In an industry where influence is often more important than talent, they had to decide whether supporting Meghan was a calculated risk worth taking or a potential liability. Deals, meetings, and collaborations were suddenly approached with caution. Executives were careful to navigate appearances, balancing the desire to maintain relationships with Meghan against the studio's subtle restrictions. The resulting tension created an atmosphere thick with intrigue and strategy. Social media amplified the drama. Fans and critics alike debated the legitimacy of MGM's decision. Headlines and tweets painted Meghan in contrasting lights, a visionary producer being unfairly blocked or a celebrity overstepping her bounds. Influencers seized the moment, posting analyses, hot takes, and speculative scenarios. The story became more than internal politics. It became a public spectacle, a real-time study in power, perception, and celebrity influence. Even late-night hosts and entertainment journalists jumped in. The talk shows, podcasts, and news segments dissected every angle. It's a classic clash of ambition versus authority, one commentator remarked. She's got fame, visibility, and influence, but in Hollywood, that only gets you so far. Satire, humor, and irony punctuated much of the coverage. But beneath the jokes, there was a serious question. Could Meghan overcome this institutional resistance, or had her Hollywood ambitions hit an insurmountable barrier? Insiders describe a flurry of private conversations, with executives weighing the consequences of either supporting or opposing her. Would backing Meghan create opportunities, partnerships, and revenue potential? Or would it alienate the entrenched studio leadership that controlled the majority of resources and influence? Hollywood thrives on calculated risk, but this was not a gamble to be taken lightly. Every step had to be measured, every word considered. Meanwhile, Meghan's efforts to charm and navigate the industry continued. She reached out to filmmakers, producers, and creative teams, seeking allies who could help her bypass the subtle barriers MGM had established. Some were intrigued by her vision, inspired by her determination, and willing to explore collaboration. Others, wary of entanglement with a high-profile figure facing internal resistance, hesitated. Hollywood is a world where risk and perception are inseparable, and Meghan's ambitions were being scrutinized from every angle. A particularly tense dynamic emerged among the so-called frenemies. Hollywood is famous for its thinly veiled rivalries, and Meghan's presence added fuel to long-standing competitions. Some insiders reportedly saw an opportunity to leverage her struggles for personal gain, subtly shaping narratives to undermine her credibility or claim influence over projects she had her eye on. In such a landscape, charm and diplomacy are critical, but so is the ability to anticipate sabotage. Meghan had to navigate both allies and adversaries, ensuring that her strategic moves didn't inadvertently give her competitors leverage. The public's fascination only heightened the tension. Fans dissected every appearance, analyzing body language, tone of voice, and the subtleties of Meghan's communications. Critics scrutinized her every word, painting the narrative with skepticism and conjecture. Headlines alternated between admiration and criticism, creating a pressure cooker of expectations. For someone accustomed to controlling the narrative, the unpredictability of public opinion added an entirely new layer of challenge. And yet, the situation wasn't entirely bleak. Sources indicate that Meghan found pockets of support, particularly among independent filmmakers, emerging directors, and creative teams seeking unconventional voices. These allies admired her persistence and believed in her vision. They provided opportunities to pitch projects, collaborate on scripts, and explore initiatives that might circumvent the limitations imposed by the Amazon MGM blacklist. For Meghan, these alliances were critical. They offered a lifeline, a foothold in an industry where influence is often hard-earned and closely guarded. But there was a catch. Every ally, every supporter, every collaborator was a potential vector for scrutiny, rumor, or conflict. Hollywood thrives on perception, and those associated with Meghan faced subtle risks. Their participation could be interpreted as defiance of studio leadership, alignment with celebrity ambition, or complicity in circumventing established protocols. Meghan's challenge was not just to secure support. It was to manage perception, balance relationships, and ensure her efforts didn't backfire. The tension escalated further as whispers began about potential retaliatory maneuvers. Some insiders suggested that Amazon MGM, while maintaining professionalism publicly, was quietly reinforcing the blacklist, ensuring that her projects faced additional scrutiny, delayed approvals, or logistical hurdles. It was a strategic push and pull. Meghan attempting to charm, persuade, and build momentum. The studio subtly tightening controls, managing risk, and asserting authority. Through it all, Meghan remained undeterred. She understood the stakes and the complexity of the environment she was navigating. She continued attending industry events, networking dinners, and private meetings, carefully presenting herself as both visionary and collaborator. Her public persona remained polished, strategic, and intentional, balancing charm with authority. Yet, despite her efforts, the subtle resistance persisted, creating tension that insiders described as electric and palpable. And then came the moment that shifted everything. Rumors began circulating that a major studio rival, observing Meghan's persistence and public narrative, was preparing to step in with an offer. An opportunity that could dramatically alter